in each of the ministerial meetings that happened since India's G20 presidency began, there was lack of consensus, largely on account of the Russia-Ukraine war and how those words should be framed. Were you apprehensive that at the end of the G20 summit there may be no joint communique, as was being widely feared in many capitals, that it will be just too much, the gaps are too many to bridge? The Indian opposition in any case was waiting to pronounce the G20 a big failure?
Well, look, I would say the way we handled it was from the very start to tell the G20 and you know, or to make them all accept this, which is wherever we get agreement, let's lock that in, you know. So we didn't want a situation where, let us say, out of 30 paras you didn't agree on 2. So you lost all 30 paragraphs. So you sort of said, okay, I give you an example. I myself chaired the development ministers meeting. Now we all agreed, all of us, all 20 of us, that the sustainable development goals had fallen, you know, well behind. It was a source of enormous global anxiety. So if we could lock that in, and we did it as a standalone document. Similarly, the idea that, you know, the idea of a lifestyle for sustainability. Everybody said, okay, I mean, we understand it, we buy it, we like it, we lock that in. So our approach was, therefore, what you could get unanimity about, lock that in, where you couldn't, in a sense, keep trying meeting after meeting after meeting to narrow that divide. And I think in retrospect, it was a sensible strategy, because what it did was it left us in the last, let's say, 2 weeks to the summit, a relatively limited number of issues, of which, of course, the Ukraine, the geopolitical paragraph, as they say, was among the most problematic. Now, here too, you know, one part of me said, yes, look, we've isolated the issue, let's work it through. But it wasn't just a question of, you know, finding the right words and, shall I say, finessing it with good language. What was happening in the real world, if you would, was also that at various levels, you know, the Sherpa and the Sherpa's team were talking, I was talking to my counterparts, at certain points of play where required, you know, Prime Minister himself came in. So we also knew that, you know, in many ways, a lot of countries were invested in the G20. They were invested in the presidency of the G20, in the current presidency of the G20. And that gave me a lot of confidence that, look, at the end of the day, there would be a desire on everybody's part to find a landing ground. So, I mean, I always believed that we would get it done. The question was, I mean, that doesn't mean it happens on its own. The last few days, I think, were particularly, in a sense, challenging, but there were some things we did which were very useful. You know, Prime Minister, for example, in the middle of, I mean, on the eve of G20, actually made a half-a-day trip to Indonesia. Okay, he flew overnight, reached Indonesia, spent a few hours, took up, you know, and then came back. Now, the impact of that was, if, you know, the others got the message that here was a Prime Minister willing to put himself out for the success of somebody else's event. Now, it generates naturally at the leadership level that sense that, look, if he is willing to do it for others, you know, we also need to reciprocate. We need to back him up. You know, both before the G20 and actually at that meeting, including the day, the morning when we finally got the conclusion. There were still issues which needed to be resolved, and in some cases, I, had to ask him, saying, it'd be good if you could speak to your counterpart. And
he did that?
Yes, he did that. So
you think his stature has gone up in the eyes of the world as India's voice in the global stage as a result of this declaration?
I mean, I can put it both ways. I think the declaration also happened because his stature had gone up. Yeah. So when he sort of brought up the issue with some of his counterparts, the fact that this was Prime Minister Modi himself bringing up the issue, I think definitely had an impact on his counterparts. And then, see, typically what happens is they then tell the people, saying, okay, look, make a harder effort, find some fix. So this was happening at multiple levels.